Welcome to Always Listening. We're your hosts. I'm Joel.
I'm Jay, and I survived the Battle of Winterfell.
And we are always listening. Jay, I want to give a personal update, first of all, and a little nod to my community here at the top of the show. I live in Ruston, Louisiana. It's in the north center part of the state. We're about 4.5 or 5 hours away from New Orleans, to give you a frame of reference for the rest of you around the world and the country. And we're on a hill. This area of the state is literally known as the Piney Hills of North Louisiana, but Ruston in particular is up on a hill. And because of that, I've been told by meteorologists in the past, severe storms tend to break around us, and we just don't have that much bad weather in town. We have heavy rainfall sometimes, but that's about it. Well, on Thursday morning, early hours Thursday morning, was like 2 a.m. or so local time, we had a tornado come right through the center of town. And it was, again, the weather reports tell me that it only was in the city limits, only in the parish, I think, which is our version of a county. It was only here about 8 minutes. But it did millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of damage. If you haven't seen any of the news before, if you literally Google Ruston, Louisiana tornado, RUSTON tornado, you can find a bunch of stories about it, I'm sure. There were very unfortunately 2 deaths. However, with the amount of damage that there was in town, I have to say we were incredibly fortunate for only 2 deaths. A young man and his mother passed away in their home. Their home was hit directly. And other than that, we really came out very, very fortunate. What that has done, though, is, among other things, is put basically the whole town out of power. I heard our mayor saying the other day was something like 60% of the power grid for the city was a complete rebuild. Not like, hey, let's put the lines back up or reconnect a few things, but we have to put whole new poles in because they had been snapped and torn apart or whatever. So the complete grid had to be rebuilt, at least in 60% of the city. They've done a fantastic job. The vast majority of the city is back with power now, but even here, it's Tuesday now, so we're close to a week out. It's like 5 days later, and still there are parts of town that don't have power. A lot of businesses are on reduced hours or still closed and things like that. A lot of businesses completely damaged, or they'll have to rebuild, or they've been relocated. So one of the things that it did to me personally is it slowed down my business over the weekend, right? Like I have a totally internet-based business and a devices-based business. So when none of my devices had power and none of them had internet, I had to relocate for a little while. I had to go to my mom and dad's house. But first and foremost, I want to say how thankful I am that my family and our home was fine. We didn't have any damage on our home directly. There's a fence that's still down on our property we got to get put back up, but other than that, we're all good. And thankful in general for our community. It's also been one of those moments when it is awesome to see how many people are willing to help out others. Like, I think we feel like we're a very disconnected and selfish time now, and everybody just worries about themselves. This is a moment where I see very clearly, at least where I live, that's not really the case. It feels that way sometimes, but it's not. People are very much giving of whatever they have. People, sharing, doing common meals and stuff. Anyway, it's amazing. So, thank you to everybody who's reached out to help, to make sure that we were okay and things like that. And if you are interested, Google that, look up some opportunities, maybe send a few bucks our way. I think there's some different fundraisers. I know my church in particular is collecting funds. I feel weird about sharing that link, and I didn't have a generic link that I've seen yet, like a Red Cross link or something. But look for a way that you can help out especially if your area has been hit by a big weather storm like this in the past. It was something that we were unaccustomed to. I've been here for like 20 years now. Well, I moved here for college in 99, and I've never seen a storm like this in Ruston anyway. The surrounding areas have been hit, many times by tornadoes and the like, but yeah, it was unbelievable. And the craziest thing is my wife and I slept through it, Jay. Like we literally slept through the whole thing. I woke up at like 6 a.m. and I've missed 5 phone calls and 15 text messages, and everybody's going, "Are you alive?" Whatever. It was unbelievable.
Well,
weird.
Joel, I'm very glad to hear that you've survived real life, unlike me surviving a fake television program. But
quickly off the top, I'll tell you this I asked you before we started if you'd seen Endgame, because I wanted to maybe talk about it after. You haven't yet, so we're going to put that off for a couple of weeks. When you see it, we will do like an after the show discussion, a short discussion of that, because we're both kind of Marvel geeks. I'll just ask you, no spoilers, but what were your opinions of the episode? I've seen a lot of variety of reaction online.
I really want to watch it again to get a better idea. My initial reaction was that, because I went into it going, this is going to be, and this isn't a real spoiler, from beginning to end, the most epic battle ever filmed. And so I went into it knowing that that was going to be the case, and it delivered on that. However, after I listened to a podcast and then sort of started really thinking about what I had just watched, I came away going, you know what? I do feel a little robbed of how it all came to an end. And I need to rewatch it and see if I really feel that way, or if I was influenced by the podcast that I was listening to that I feel that way. But yeah, I sort of gave it some second thought and went, you know what? That's a very good point. Like I invested a lot of time in this, and it just all came to an end like that.
So the big thing that I will say, and again, this isn't a spoiler either, the choice to frame this battle at night, while it makes sense in the context of where the story was and like what all was happening, and it even makes sense, I think, probably from a production level, it was probably a little cheaper. They could probably fudge a few things with CGI and whatnot because it was dark. Having said all of that, it meant none of us could see a darn thing. I've got a nice television, Jay. Right. I was watching it in 1080p. I wasn't watching it in 4K or HDR, but even my friends who did said, yeah, I couldn't see Bupkis, like I don't, there was so many scenes in the middle of it where I'm just like, well, I have a general sense of what's happening. And every now and again, you'd see like a face. You're like, oh, that's so-and-so. Looks bad for them, doesn't it? But like, anyway, it was a little underwhelming. And alternatively, I will say that was the very opposite for Endgame. It was not underwhelming in any aspect. I'll just say that. And then hopefully you guys will all enjoy those pop culture things and listen to them discussed in full on a great podcast. Now, Jay, why don't we get to some of the business of podcasting this week? Because there is actually a lot of stuff to talk about. Yes. Yeah. So we're going to start with Luminary. How about let's do that? And Jay, I'm going to give like a little overview of what Luminary is for people that are maybe listening to this and haven't followed the story very closely. I think you and I have been keeping up with them for a while. We've mentioned them some before, but it hasn't been a,
if you haven't heard of Luminary player over this last week,
it hasn't been a main player in podcasting. I think if you're not very into watching the ecosphere, you and I have been following them, but I think maybe the average podcaster hasn't. So here's what they are. They are a new podcast app that theoretically would allow you to subscribe to any podcast. They have a directory just like iTunes or Stitcher or anybody, right? And you can search for a show and subscribe to your favorite podcasts in it. But the other thing, the primary driver for them, is that they have premium content that you can only get, exclusive original shows that you can only get with an $8 a month subscription. So they are, and they very specifically call themselves this, the Netflix of audio. They're the Netflix of podcasting. That's their model. The reason why anybody really heard about them and they began to make waves is they were advertising heavily, promoting their launch before it was here, saying podcasts don't have to have ads. Podcasts shouldn't have ads. There's another way. It's coming, Luminary. And it made a big stink for a lot of podcasters who make a lot of money and support themselves and their shows and their networks using advertising. A lot of people were very angry about the way that Luminary had positioned themselves in that first outlay.
Not to be too heavily biased on this, the tone that you just set forth is not the tone of voice that Luminary was using specifically when it came to advertising. They were very, very anti-ads to the point where it wasn't podcasts don't need to have ads. It was podcasts shouldn't have ads, period. That was sort of their thing. And even to this day, in response to a lot of the things that have happened since they launched, they continue to have a very snarky, very we know more than you sort of tone. And I think that's what's setting a lot of podcasters off over this past week.
And then this all came to a head when it became clear just before they actually launched. There were some stories that broke before their actual unveiling as an iOS app and Android app that some big shows, in particular, everything from Gimlet Media and everything from Anchor's network, anybody who was on the Anchor, creation app and was hosting with Anchor, those shows would not be appearing in the Luminary app or their directory, but also The Daily, which you've mentioned several times. It's not a show actually that I listen to, but that is on your list of regular listens, isn't it, Jay?
No, not really. I've listened
you dip in
to
and out
it
sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's one of the most widely listened to it's on the level of This American Life, right, and probably on a regular basis above it, I would say. Now it's become that. There is no podcast which is like old network television and 400 million people listen to or anything. There's nothing that everybody watches like the MASH finale. However, as big as you can get in podcasting, The Daily is that.
Correct.
And it's not going to be in this Luminary app. Why? Why aren't these shows going to be in there? What is their beef, theoretically, with Luminary, Jay, at least as you understand it?
Well, I honestly believe it's a misunderstanding of exactly how Luminary set themselves up before launch. This all goes towards, we've been talking about this, staying in your lane and understanding what your lane is. Well, the Luminary made it very clear before they launched that their lane was going to be a paid app with content on it. And they kept trying to say, unfortunately, it went underreported, way underreported, that no, we're going to have free listening on our app as well. But the main thrust and the main reason why this app exists and the reason why we have venture capitalist money to support us is because we're going to be the Netflix of podcasting. We're going to charge people to come listen to ad-free shows that we're going to host exclusively on our app. And because of that misunderstanding, a lot of companies went, well, wait a second, you're charging people to listen to these shows. Well, we need to have part of that money. We need to have a license that it's mutually beneficial for both of us. Nick Qua goes into this quite a bit on Hot Pod, and actually has a great line that I thought sort of sums a lot of this up, saying, in other words, it's the difference between mutualism and parasitism, where Luminary was hoping that they could get a lot of the people that are listening on the free side to become premium subscribers to listen to the content that they're offering. Now, there are other apps that do this, but have done so in a different manner. And perhaps it's because of the way that their timeline moved out. But Stitcher has premium content that only lives on the Stitcher app. But Stitcher is also a free listening app. A lot of attention has moved away from Stitcher here in recent years. Stitcher used to be the number 2 to Apple, but it was a distant number 2. And then Google's shown up and they've gotten a lot of attention, and Spotify is now the real number 2. And there's a whole bunch of new players on the board. Stitcher, in terms of where they rank in terms of overall ecosystem listening, is down in the, what I like to call the 1%ers.
So Stitcher is a perfect analog, I think. And to me, Stitcher is a prophetic story for Luminary if you look at the history of Stitcher. So Stitcher was the number 2. And what happened, Jay, to stall that out and kill it? The podcast industry said, Stitcher, we don't want you to repurpose our content. You're taking our stuff in, you're holding the file, reserving it directly at a lower bit rate so it sounds worse, and you're serving ads on top of it in between, and we're not seeing anything for that. And many big producers took their stuff off. A lot of smaller producers like me kept their stuff off of Stitcher for a long time because of that. That dwindled down, and again, it was like people pushing them, saying to their listeners, go and find this other app, listen to us over here, get us on our website, pushing people away from Stitcher. We weren't promoting the Stitcher brand as much because of those conflicts, because of the things that they were doing that the open podcast industry saw as aggressive and negative. They eventually got down to a place where they needed to be bought. They were bought, tossed around several times, ignored for a couple of years, finally end up as part of Midroll, where the very first thing Midroll did was publicly say, we're going to stop reserving your content. We're going to share it directly from your RSS feed. We're going to access it. You'll get the stats directly from now on. There's no need for us to do that. We can still stitch in ads in between content as we've been doing without messing with your content. And generally podcasters were like, cool, awesome, thanks. I went back in. I know lots of people that are back in Stitcher now. We still don't promote the app necessarily, but our content is there if people want to listen to us there. And so when they began to promote premium content on top of that, and the idea that they could remove all of the ads from that interstitial stuff, I don't have a problem with them doing that on top. If you want to buy Wolverine, and I'm trying to think, Finding Richard Simmons, right? That was a Stitcher premium show. So if you want to go buy Finding Richard Simmons and, oh, wait a minute, they're mid-roll. So there are also things like, hey, I subscribe to them to listen to all of Hardcore Game of Thrones, where it's they spoof hardcore history but talk about Game of Thrones. That's an amazing show. The only place you can get it is behind Stitcher Premium's paywall. So like I went and did that for a few months, caught up on that show, listened to a few others. I don't have any problem with that. What Luminary did, and I was looking for the exact area. Okay, so we've talked a lot about Marco Arment. He was the one, the creator of Overcast, and he also has discussed in his own podcast, Accidental Tech Podcast, about how this is a fine line for him, ethically speaking, because he has a conflict of interest here. He is a podcast app creator, and he understands that.
Well, and there's more to Marco's that I want to get into, too.
Sure. He also, though, there's a new feature of that we should talk about, actually. He also, though, is a out loud public proponent for the open podcast ecosystem. Like, that is the reason he built Overcast in the first place, is he was concerned about what Apple may do, and he wanted to duplicate their directory in a way that if they closed it down, he could offer an alternative to the industry at large. And that's what he continues to say that he wants to do in the future. He says that he tested it a little bit, and Luminary says that they were one-to-one proxying shows, which they say they're not reserving the content. What they were doing was ensuring a standardized listening experience so that no matter whether you're downloading a show that comes from Libsyn or Spreaker or your WordPress directory or wherever you might be hosting the actual media files, because they were doing proxy servers for everything in their directory, all of the downloads would be the same.
Right.
Now, I don't know enough, but Marco says that, in fact, it's not going to be faster in general and for the vast majority of people, because most podcasting is hosted on these big media hosts. It shouldn't be a problem. But, okay, fine, take them at their word. He also says that should be an easy fix then. It should be like 2 lines of code, and they could just turn everybody's switches back to where it goes directly back to our own feeds. My big problem with what Luminary has done here, and I'm not sure the technical reason why it's happened. I think I know the business reason why it's happened. But if you look in their app at show notes, any information about advertisers and links out have all been stripped. It's not like Spotify where the show notes are truncated or not formatted properly or sort of messy looking, but they are literally pulling parts of that information out. I don't know whether it's automated in some fashion of like, hey, let's just dump everything after this, or if it's no hyperlinks and so dump that information completely, or if it's a matter of like, look for words like sponsor, et cetera, and pull those out. I don't know how nefarious it is, but the end result is that if a end listener finds my show or your show or anyone's show in the Luminary app, there is no method for them to take that information out of the Luminary app. There's no link back to my website. There's no link to my Twitter accounts. There's no link to my social accounts, my Facebook group, et cetera, et cetera. So let's say Luminary crashes as a startup and folds in 6 months or 9 months. Any potential listeners you have there don't have a way out to continue listening to your content. If you have something to sell in your show or promote or a newsletter list or whatever, there's no way for them to follow up on that through the Luminary app. This is the big problem for me I haven't taken my shows out yet only because it's hard to do, Jay. It's hard to do. I will do it though. And that is the reason. The linking, the outside linking. You have to do that or is this a deal breaker for me.
Is this different than what Apple? Because you can't put links on Apple. You can, the wording is there, but it doesn't hyperlink.
So it's different. So when you're talking about the directory, the little short summary, you're right. There's no hyperlinks in the short summary, but the full description that shows up in the app does include hyperlinks. The hyperlinks work just fine. And also in the Apple Podcasts app, in your show listing, there is a link that says show website. And it takes you directly to your website. And you can do that even without being subscribed. So again, Apple is a directory and they expect people to stay in their podcast app and use their podcast app and not go outside of it. Sure. But all of those things are available to you there as a listener if you interact with content. And again, since Apple's podcast app is built on the open RSS standard, if their directory goes away, it doesn't matter. Or if I'm booted from their directory, as we talked about with InfoWars, if I'm booted from their directory, that doesn't matter for the people who are subscribed to my show today because they're not subscribed through iTunes or Apple. They're subscribed to my RSS feed, and they'll keep getting it as long as my RSS feed is active. That's the strength of the open podcast industry. That's what I see Luminary trying to choke. In a way, even, Jay, that Spotify's not. Look at what we haven't talked about this yet on the show, but Spotify now has a deal to pass through the dynamic advertising from Spreaker, which means that Spreaker shows are not being reserved on Spotify's servers. They're going directly from the RSS feed. That will eventually roll out, you imagine, to all the other media hosts. So there's Spotify leaning into the open podcast ecosystem, even as they want to be the Netflix or the YouTube of podcasting. They see what the industry is, and they see we can adapt to it as we try to control the biggest portion of it. They want to be the biggest player. They don't want to kill it. Luminary wants to kill us.
By the way,
they're trying to say it nicely, but they want to kill us as an industry.
Well, and the other thing that I thought was interesting about what Luminary was doing that I did not know about until I read Hot Pod today from Nick Qua, and they apparently put promos on Apple for their Luminary exclusive podcasts. So essentially, they were looking for the free advertising that you can get from Apple by creating a podcast feed to a podcast that will never be in Apple and telling people to go back to the Luminary app. And Apple apparently caught that and cut that out. So, I heard Todd and Rob talk about this on the New Media Show. They're essentially dad, right? So they've offered their consulting services to any startup such as Luminary, but they don't want to listen to dad. I would say the same thing. Joel and I are available. We mentioned this last week. We're available for consulting. We're like the older brother, and you're probably still not going to listen to us. But quite honestly, I do have just one small bit of advice with all of the apologies that they've issued over the last week is you have to change your tone of voice because the snarky responses are the ones that are getting the press, not the apologies. And so you can be as apologetic as you want, but it's not going to work at this point. You've already lost. And I mentioned I wanted to bring this up with Marco. So the podcast industry pretty much, from the bubble that I'm in, as I saw, overwhelmingly said, we're done. Luminary, you're dead to us. Why is it? If the reasoning for that was because Luminary was taking this content and benefiting from having the free content on their app to promote their paid subscription model, why is it that there isn't the same type of reaction to an app that you have to pay, the listener has to pay to get my free content. They can get my content on any listening app, but there are listening apps out there that take my RSS feed and charge a listener a fee to listen to my particular podcast. I'm not getting any money for that, and I'm speaking specifically of Overcast. So Overcast, you have to pay $2.99 to get that app, but I don't see any part of that money.
That's incorrect. That's incorrect. Overcast is a free app. There is an in-app purchase that you can add, but it's literally a donation. He has some bonus features that he adds in if you want to make a donation. But it's Overcast is an absolutely free app.
Is that the wrong one?
There are apps.
Which one?
I'm trying to think of one that you have to pay for. Castro, you still have to pay for instance. Castro is like $2.99 one-time purchase. But so for those, it's about the software though, Jay, in my opinion most of those don't have an ongoing fee. Now, Marco does have, his is I do personally an annual subscription of $9.99 to him as an in-app purchase through Apple. And there used to be dark mode that was only behind the in-app purchase, but I think that's free for everybody now too. Oh, one of the things that I get with that is I get access to his website to upload files. So I'm an audiobook producer. I edit audiobooks for myself and for others a lot of times, and I take those files, upload them to my Overcast account so that I can listen to them with his Smart Speed and Vocal Boost features as I'm proofing them to finish them. I can listen through Overcast because it's my favorite listening app. That is a feature that I get access to because I'm a subscriber of the thing. But now he's talked about in the past, he had a plan originally to do something like, hey, I have a monthly subscription and I will look at your statistics and divide up the money that you send to me and give it to podcast producers. But the way that he talked to podcast producers about that idea even. And he said in the end, they all said, well, I mean, yeah, I'd sign up to take the money, but I'm not going to promote it. Because if I'm going to promote anything, I'm going to promote my direct connection with my audience.
Right.
So if I've already got a Patreon, that's what I'm going to promote. If I've already got a PayPal, that's what I'm going to promote.
Well,
but so no, Overcast isn't a paid app.
Ultimately, I apologize for using Overcast as an example, poor example. But my point is there are apps out there that they basically scrape Apple, and then they charge a listener to pay to listen on their particular listening app. That's taking our free content and charging the listener. They're basically benefiting from using our content without paying us for it. And there's not the same outrage or uproar. They're probably getting just as many listens on that particular listening app as Luminary is getting. But they're just not getting the press that Luminary is getting. So I see a little bit of hypocriticism there. However, I think Nick put it best, and it's a difference between mutualism and being a parasite. Whereas while they are charging a listener base to use their particular app to listen to your free content, they're not messing with your content in any sort of way like we've already suggested with Luminary. And I think that is the main difference there. Sort of like, yeah, you're benefiting financially off of my content ultimately, but at the end of the day, you're not messing up my ability to continue to earn revenues off of the podcast in the manners that I have chosen to benefit off of them. So
here's a couple of examples, Jay. Pocket Casts on iOS. I don't know what it costs on Pocket Casts is one of those that is cross-platform, by the way. I don't know what it costs on Android, but on iOS it costs $3.99. And it's a one-time purchase. Castro, which is one that I've used in the past, Castro's got a neat feature. Elsie Escobar always talks about using it, and the reason why she loves it is for this. They've got this feature, it's basically like a queue. So their big thing is prioritizing your inbox. So like, hey, every time you load the app, here's the 15 podcasts or the 15 episodes that have come out since the last time you opened the app. And you go through and triage, and you go, I don't want to listen to that one. Oh, I do want to listen to that one. I don't want to listen to that one. I do want to listen to that one. I do. And then you've got a queue of like 5 good episodes, and you just listen to those. And so that's like their big model. They're free apparently now to use. They were paid when I first tried them. They are free now, but there is a Castro Plus subscription for $8.99 a year. There's a free trial you can try, and you can sign up for that. I'm not sure what features come with it, but I imagine it's things like what Marco does. It's sort of, again, Marco's basically unlocked all of the basic features for his app, because his argument was, I don't want the people who are just coming to try my app to be trying the worst version of my app. I want them to use everything. Like Smart Speed and Vocal Boost originally especially were the reasons to use Overcast, because nobody else had them, not in the way that he was doing them anyway. Most apps have copied them by now, and they're pretty good too. Okay, here, Castro says what they do. Okay, so here's what you get for your subscription with Castro. Trim silence, which means that's like the vocal, the Smart Speed in Overcast, where it dynamically reduces the silence. They've got a vocal boost, which is with the paid subscription. Side loading, so you can load files in from your iCloud drive, which is what Marco lets you do too. Mono mix, so you can automatically mix a podcast down to mono, make them easier in case they're normally panned. You don't have to deal with that. Chapter support is apparently behind their paywall, so you can't skip chapters and see the chapter specific artwork in Castro unless you pay for their subscription. And then custom settings per podcast, so like episode limit, whether you turn on the trim silences or not, enhanced voices or not, mono mix, etc., all of that comes with Castro Plus. So here's my argument as a producer why I don't mind that. First of all, it's a very small amount compared to what Luminary is getting, right? Luminary's got this VC money that they're coming in. It's hundreds of millions of dollars that they're shoving around to different people, and they're not paying you or me any of that. And they won't ever. With this, $8.99 for a year for one user. And first of all, like, how big is Castro? If you listen to Libsyn, Castro doesn't even show up in the mentioned apps anymore unless he calls it out specifically for Escobar. It's like way down there on the list. So the numbers are very small to begin with. And also, to me, those people are paying for the software advantages that he's offering, or that developer is offering, just like with Overcast. If I'm paying Marco for the software that enables me to listen to those podcasts. I know I could go straight to your website or to Stitcher or just the Apple Podcast app. I've used it in the past. The Apple Podcast app is fine. I went to Overcast because of the things that Marco adds, and that's why I'm paying him. So I think that's the difference there. Whereas, Jay, Luminary has 40 engineers, they say, working on this app. It's a crappy app. It's not a good app.
Yeah, it does seem like somebody had an idea. Well, first of all, they have got a great salesperson, because they managed to scrounge up $150 million for a really bad launch. And with 40 engineers, they've created, like you just said, a crappy app. I haven't actually downloaded their app or listened to anything on their app, so I can't speak to that nature. And I can tell you I probably won't go and listen to their particular app, because I admitted it last week. I still listen on my iPod. So I don't know. Ultimately, my whole thing here is this could have all been avoided. You could have had a much easier launch if you had done things the way that things have always been done, and the way that things are being done now. By going out and doing things differently and screwing with podcasters' content the way that they have, they've now ruined what could have been something that could have worked. I've always mentioned, I'm not against putting things behind a paywall. I'm not against creating the Netflix of podcasting, but you got to go about it and do it with reverence to what has come before. Those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. So this all could have been easily avoided. And at this point, I don't think that there's a way that they can come back and save it. Maybe there is. $150 million does go a long way. So maybe there is a way that they can get themselves a PR team that can go and sort of put out new messaging and fix what's going on. I think they got a people problem, though. I think that there are people involved in that particular company that think they're smarter than the rest of us and are going to go about and do things the way that they believe it needs to be done. And that's just not going to get the work done. That I have learned in podcasting that you can't have that attitude. You have to come with the attitude of, I'm going to work with everybody. And I'm going to work in a way that's going to mutually benefit everybody, not just benefit myself. Because if you don't, well, that's what podcasting basically is. It's the sense of community that has come, that people that want to do a show about sports or want to do a show about health or want to do a show about their kid growing up, or they want to do a show about the daily news, or they want to do a show about anything, can all come together and work together to form a real voice of community that didn't exist prior to podcasting because it was controlled by corporations behind a radio station and a television station. And, you know, now everyone has a voice. And
it's the same reason why we all reacted so badly to that Ed Ryan article a couple of weeks ago, Jay, the one in Podcast Business Journal. You know, we are a very...
The Washington Post, actually.
Well, that one too.
Oh, yeah.
We are a very community-oriented industry. We are still in our beginnings, and many of us in this industry do have, I guess, a bit of a chip on our shoulder about being overlooked or stamped out by our bigger media brothers and people coming into this space and saying they know, you know, it's like the guy, it's iHeartRadio saying they were doing the first ever podcast award show. Bite me, you know, like it wasn't the first ever podcast awards show. It's the article talking about, I saw somebody saying, I listened to a podcast today and the host said, I'm talking to one of the very first podcasters. He started in 2010. And you're like, nope. You were 6 years late, buddy. Like, there were people doing it before it was podcasting. Before the RSS spec was finished, there were already people trying to make it happen. You know, we've talked about those beginnings.
Well, and even to that degree, though, again, I called them out on it. Elsie and Jessica with the first women's conference is how they first worded it. And I was quick to point out, if we're going to be quick to point out all these other places saying they are the first, then you need to change your wording because you are not the first. There are others that have been here before you. So, and they did, to their credit, they changed the wording around so that it was more specific to female-centric podcasts rather than female content creators, I think is what they originally were saying.
Yeah. We've talked about this too much. I think we've given Luminary way more time than they need. I will point, I've got a link here in the article or in the show notes to the Daring Fireball, daringfireball.net, which is John Gruber's website. Here's the other thing that ticks me off about this, Jay. They're trying to take the name podcasts. And I think it's hilarious since we spent like 12 years arguing over whether or not we should use the name podcast to begin with, that now somebody wants to steal it and appropriate it. But listen, John Gruber describes this perfectly. All podcasts are shows. Not all shows are podcasts. If you have a YouTube channel and that's the only way that you're distributing your show, you have a show. You don't have a podcast. If you have anything that is not distributed openly over RSS, and I'll go with Rob Walsh's definition that it has to be in the Apple Podcast directory because that's the one that feeds all the other directories. Those two things, it has to be available via RSS. It has to be in the Apple Podcast directory. If those two things are met, then I agree with you. You have a podcast. I don't care what you do on it. But if those two things aren't met, you don't have a podcast. You don't. I'm not mad at you for creating your show in whatever medium you've created it in. I think it's wonderful. If you want to make a vlog or a vidcast or a YouTube channel or a XM radio show, that's what John Gruber points out. He says, look, Luminary is not creating anything new. XM Satellite Radio has been doing this for 20 years, right? Nobody calls the Howard Stern Show a podcast. You can take the Howard Stern Show, cut it up, and distribute it as a podcast if you wanted to. Luminary doesn't make podcasts.
Well,
that's not what these are.
Well, you can't. Howard Stern could.
Good point.
And Howard Stern
could
won't.
if you wanted to. No.
Well, you want to talk about something else, here's a story about a little plucky startup that just came out this week. They launched today, as a matter of fact, called Red Circle. They've raised $1.5 million, so a lot less than $150 million, in its seed round, and offers free hosting, which I know everyone's going to get on them for, analytics access, distribution help, and other features. Their ultimate philosophy is they don't want to make money from you. They want to make money with you. And they're very much focused on smaller independent podcasters. And they've developed a cross promotion system within their hosting devices to help with cross promotion amongst other podcasters. Tom Webster of Edison Research keeps letting us know right now, word of mouth is still the quickest and easiest and most popular way of learning about new podcasts. Cross promotion is ultimately what's going to work, and making something that will work at scale is going to work best. Their ultimate business model is, of course, through ad revenue. And I only bring that up like an old Bill Cosby before he was an evil man comedy skit. I told you that story to tell you this one. Spotify released their earnings from Q1. And if you look at the difference between the amount of money they made via their premium subscribers, they're now over 100 million premium subscribers on Spotify, versus what they made via ad supported. Just in Q1, they made, it looks like, $1.3 billion in premium subscriptions. If I'm reading this correctly, I believe it's in pounds, actually. So that it's got to be converted. And
or euros.
And only 126 million in ad supported. There's obviously a giant, there's $1 billion missing, a $1.2 billion in discrepancy there. And that's sort of what I've been talking about. Spotify now has enough scale where they could actually make that ad supported grow even further. But that's Spotify with over 250,000 podcasts in its core that they can help monetize. Red Circle is a little startup with $1.5 million in seed money that might be able to get, I don't know, right now Libsyn is the biggest host on the planet. They don't have 250,000 podcasts, I don't believe. I don't know what Libsyn is up to at this particular point. But that's sort of what I'm getting at. Like, the ad-supported model can work, but you have to have massive scale for it to work forever. So the free model that they're offering is only going to get them so far. I can tell you, for instance, publicly available information that my former employer announced that in 2018, the Prime hosts, whom I helped create that, I didn't help, I created that particular program at Blog Talk Radio, which is now part of Voxnest, earned $1 million in 2018. Well, on a 60-40 split, that means out of that ad revenue, Voxnest only earned a little over $600,000 in ad revenue. That also doesn't include the amount of expenses that goes into what had to be paid to the ad agencies, the hosting fees that are involved there. So that 600,000 got a lot smaller. And Voxnest is the number 3 hosting platform currently in the podcasting ecosphere. So that's just going a long ways to tell you there's publicly available information that shows the model can be successful, but will only be successful at massive scale, and why you should always be diversifying your revenue streams. Should not be just going with an all ad supported. Should not be going with an all paywall supported. You should not be going with an all services supported. It should be all of them together. Maximize the revenue. That's the way that you're going to best win, quote unquote, the game of podcasts.
Nice tie to our pop culture beginnings there. I like it. That is fairly shocking to me, the disparity, and you were reading those numbers right. I had to read the charts about 3 times to make sure that where you were getting that information, but you were. It's over $1 billion per quarter for the premium revenue, and it's only just over $100 million per quarter for their ad revenue for Spotify. Huge disparity there, even though you're talking about you're talking about a massive number more listeners in the free model than the premium.
And by the way,
they have a lot of have a lot of paid subscribers, but they also have a tremendous number more that are non-paid subscribers.
And if I'm reading this correctly, they're still operating at a negative. They're still operating at a loss. I'm not 100%.
Yeah.
Sure on that.
No, I think that's how I read it as well. Or at least currently, they were still operating a loss. I think they're projecting a break even or revenue soon, but it's not. They're still not there yet.
At $1.4 billion a quarter, Spotify still operates at a loss. Let that sink in for a second.
I want to do a feel good story here to kind of wrap this up, Jay. And I'm going off of the show notes actually, but this is sort of in relation to something we mentioned earlier. We talked a lot about Marco Arment and the Overcast app, some of the things that he's bringing to the table technology wise. He came out with a new feature this week. He also changed his versioning number, which I think is really cool. He has moved to, from now on, the app. So like right now, if you go and look in the App Store, it's Overcast 2019.4. That's 2019, obviously, and this is the fourth update that he's made in the year 2019. At this point, he says, I'm no longer holding back features for like a major update level. When a feature is ready, I release it. And that's just the new feature that comes out whenever it's ready. And that way I don't have to wait every year in the fall. I'm trying to make a new version so that I can sell an upgrade or something like that. I'm just going to produce the app. You guys that like it, support it if you can with the premium in-app purchase, which I do. The new feature that came out is clip sharing. So for a long time, maybe from the very beginning, I think, you could share, of course, any episode that you're listening to from Overcast. You can share out a link to that episode directly in Twitter or Facebook, or copy it and send it in an email or a text message or whatever. And that link would, instead of going to the app, it would have a little web view and it would show the episodes. You could make it playable. So anybody, whether you shared it with somebody on Android or a desktop computer or whatever, anyone could access the audio you wanted to send them right away. The other thing that he implemented was timestamps. Instead of just sharing the episode, you could say share from this timestamp. So I'm listening to a particular thing, and this is the topic that I want you to, okay, they get to the episode part where they're talking about Endgame, and I want to share that with Jay. I can share it directly. He can start right there and listen to just that conversation. This takes that a step further. Marco saw that it was difficult in social media apps in particular to get any traction on just the raw link. Twitter and Facebook bury those. They don't promote them in any way. What they do promote, and especially Instagram, promotes video. Right? Mm-hmm. So he has now produced, you can either create audio or video snippets directly from your listening app. You're listening to a show in Overcast, you hear something compelling, you click the share button, and there's one of the options in your drop-down menu is to create a snippet. Share a clip instead of share the show. And a little editor pops up, you drag the bar where you want it to start, you drag the bar where you want it to stop. And then if you're creating video, there are even options that you can set up. You can make it a widescreen video, you can make it a square video, you can make it a tall video. You can add in the subscribe on Overcast button. So there's a little button there below the audio that's playing. You can even he adds the Apple Podcasts button if you want to. And Marco goes one step further than that. You can check a box that puts in subscribe in Castro or subscribe in Pocket Casts. Here's Marco advertising for his competitors. Why? Why would he do that, Jay? Oh, and by the way, the whole thing, there is an option you can turn on or off, a little logo that says shared from Overcast, and it's his logo. And you can turn that off if you want to. He said, because this app and my whole thing right now is about maintaining the open podcasting ecosystem, I want it to be easier to onboard new people to podcasts. And the way to do that is to share these little clips and to get everybody sharing them. Some people are not going to want to share a clip if it's promoting my app. So fine. Uncheck the box and don't say that you shared it from Overcast. Uncheck the box that says subscribe in Overcast even. You can do that. It only says subscribe in Apple Podcasts, or only says subscribe in Castro, or only says subscribe in Pocket Casts if you want to. Now, why you would do that while you're sharing it from Overcast yourself, I don't know.
Right.
But like, let's say you want to do that, Jay. Anyway, this is the kind of thing, exactly as Nick said, it's not parasitic. It is additive. It is symbiotic. It is coexisting. He sees a whole. We talk all the time about discoverability and about onboarding for how do people even discover that there's this content out there that they want to listen to? And people say, I don't listen to podcasts because there's not a podcast for me. How do they find out that there is? This is how. So if you're a podcast listener, especially if you're a podcast producer, I would suggest, if you're not using Overcast yet, this might be the reason to get into it. If you start doing your own podcast listening in Overcast and make a habit of 2 or 3 times a week, grabbing a clip from someone else's show, not your own, someone else's show, and promoting it. Say, man, I learned a lot today from X. Or boy, Aaron Mahnke killed me when he got to this part of the story. Or, oh my God, I'd never thought about taxes in the way that I did until I listened to this Freakonomics episode, and you share that one really good segment. In my little corner of Twitter, I've seen this explode over the last few days. People are going back to old shows that have been long dead and sharing, their favorite highlights now because it's so easy to do. This is something that we could do as producers anyway with the audiogram apps, right, Jay? I mean, this is something that a lot of us have been doing as producers, but here's a way that even just listeners can get involved and really make it social. And I am excited about it. I think as this gets spread out, I think it's going to be really, really helpful. And I also think it's going to grow Overcast. I think it's going to help Marco.
It should. I think it's a fantastic tool. It'd be great to have that available everywhere. I mean, ultimately, we've discussed this. Whether it's promoting, you ultimately want to control your audience and control their experience via your ecosphere. And the best way to do that is through your website. So if this is something that's going to help you and Marco at the same time, then it's not a bad thing. That's for sure. It's a good thing.
Jay, I had a tornado and a Marvel movie to go see, and we both had a Winterfell to save in Westeros. So I don't think I've got a new podcast to suggest this week. Do you?
Yeah, unfortunately, while you were dealing with real life, my real life involved a wedding, a baby celebration, family from the West Coast, from Florida, and over 4 hours of NFL draft coverage on my own podcast. So, I haven't done a lot of new podcast listening.
So here's what I'm going to do to combat that. I'm going to try to share out some of my favorite podcasts that I listened to this week
from the Overcast app.
Yeah, from the Overcast app. That's right. I'll load those up on Twitter on the Always Listen.
And I'll retweet.
Twitter. There you go.
I'll retweet what Joel does.
See, that's something your iPod can't do. Your iPod can't share video clips.
I was going to say, can Overcast make it so I can listen to it on my iPod? That'd be great.
Not yet, but it does look like after this summer and after the new versions of Mac OS and iOS that we'll probably get Overcast on the Mac side too. So even people who primarily live on their laptops can get some access to some of these features too. Interesting stuff going on in podcasting as always. If you've got specific questions about something or how some news affects your show or your aspect of podcasting, your little corner of our ecosystem, we'd love to help you answer that. Email us, alwayslisteningpod@gmail.com anytime. And of course, Jay, they can follow you on Twitter where?
At The Real Podvader, facebook.com/Podvader page, especially if you're looking to hire me to consult you, help you avoid some of these roadblocks that we've discussed here on today's show that are easily avoidable.
If you're a giant podcasting startup looking to pivot into a more harmonious ecosystem along with the rest of the podcasting world, Jay might know something about that. You can find me at The Rogues Life on Twitter. You can find everything else I do at propodcastingservices.com. By the way, on propodcastingservices.com, my personal blog is called The Rogues Life, just like my Twitter account is. And I have just begun, Jay, a series of posts. The first one went up yesterday. I am rewatching the entire MCU now that I have seen Endgame.
Oh.
And I am going to be discussing each movie individually in respect to my thoughts after I've seen Endgame. So don't go and read any of those until you've seen the new movie. But once you've seen the latest Avengers film, if you're a geek like me in that regard, you can go check out the website and see what I've thought. So far, Iron Man is up. I am in the middle of Incredible Hulk as we speak, actually.
Yeah, again, wedding and new baby celebration. So it sort of overruled Endgame, even as much as me and the boy protested.
Well, but the good news for you is you live in that sports version of Twitter that is easier probably to mute some of the spoilers.
Oh.
Like Geek Twitter is all I'm in, so I'm terribly worried about somebody destroying something.
I'm actually surprised that I didn't see this tweet, but apparently LaShawn McCoy, running back for the Buffalo Bills, spoiled Endgame for a whole bunch of sports fans. Yes. Even in my little bubble, I'm telling you right now that there are certain things that spread into everyone's bubble. Winterfell, MCU, that's going in everybody's bubble, whether they like it or not. It's going to be there. So it's, yeah. And we talked about this, right? I talked about the need to be immediate, the immediacy in life, and it happens on social media. Everything on social media is immediate. So if your podcast doesn't follow that same idea, you might want to reconsider that.
You're missing out. There's an opportunity there. Absolutely. All right. Well, let's get back to the immediacy of real life. We'll be back to you with more info on the podcasting industry next week. Until then, we've been your hosts. I'm Joel.
I'm Jay.
And we are always listening.
Oh, you were waiting for me to say something clever, weren't you?
I was a little bit. Always Listening is a proud member of the Two Guys and a Rogue network. You can find all of our past episodes, including more than 100 podcast reviews, at alwayslisteningpod.com in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. For help on your podcast, visit propodcastingservices.com. Our theme song is Enough from Bethany Rabel.
When that day comes and I stop breathing, will you bury me with my love? Will you bury me with my love? 'Cause if I never thought twice about dying, then this ain't no life at all. Honey, it ain't no life at all. Yeah, I know I ain't seen it all, but I've seen enough. Yeah, I know I ain't seen it all, but I've seen enough. Yeah, I know I ain't seen it all, but I've seen enough. Yeah, I know I ain't seen it all, but I've had enough.
Two Guys and a Rogue.
I'm one guy,
I'm the other.
and this is the network.